because my company is a small biotech company. We have just under 50 people. And when I say my company, it's not my company. I don't own it. I just work there. But it's the company's called Sanaria, S-A-N-A-R-I-A. We're working on one primary project, which is the development of a malaria vaccine. And it's something that the company was founded to create. The company was founded in 2002 by Stephen Hoffman, who was at the time the director of the Navy's malaria vaccine research program. Before that he was that, and then he moved to vice president of genomics, of biologics at Sanaria, which was doing the whole human genome thing. And so after that, he decided to found this company in his kitchen in 2002. They applied for grants, the company grew, and about 2008, when I was getting out of school, I started looking around to where to go. And the one thing I knew was that I really did not want to do a postdoc. And that's because and maybe some of you feel the same way. A postdoc kind of seemed like everything that I hated about grad school and none of the things that I liked about grad school. So it's just sort of like, well, you've got the long hours and the low pay, maybe not an industry, as we just saw there, but you've got, you don't have the fun things, like it's kind of like a camaraderie in grad school, and you've got social events, and you've got, I actually like grading exams. That was fun. You sit there with pizza and you laugh at the stupid answers at the undergrad. That was fun. But none of that in postdoc, and teaching too. I really like teaching. Can't really do that in postdoc as much unless you've got some special prearranged situation. So basically I asked somebody, a friend of a friend, do you really need to do a postdoc? And she basically said, yes. And then she ended up telling my friend, who told me, oh, I told him that he needed to do a postdoc. I think he only wanted to hear what he wanted to hear. Which is true. I only wanted to hear what I wanted to hear. I only wanted to hear, no, you don't have to do a postdoc, there's another way. And I found another way. But it was pure luck, and it really wasn't that different. And the way is you join a company that's too small to have postdocs. So when, the way I found my job, everyone's got their story of how they found their job, and it's always something very specific to them that won't help you at all, and that's my story. So what happened with me was, one day in 2007, I went to a malaria conference. I was studying malaria at Hopkins over in Mont Hall in Ernesto Freire's lab. And I went to a conference one day, and I saw this guy, Stephen Hoffman. I saw him give a presentation. And I thought, this is really interesting what he's talking about. His vaccine seems really promising. Maybe I could work there. And then by pure coincidence, my wife's mother's college roommate's husband came to dinner one night, and he turned out to be one of the people who works at this tiny little company. And so he's talking about this company, and I said, wow, that's incredible. I just saw your CEO speak. Are you guys hiring? And he said, no. But he said, you know, you're working on malaria. We have outside people come and give seminars sometimes. Would you like to just come and give a seminar some afternoon? So I said, sure. So I came, I gave a seminar about my current research. And then a few months later, when they were looking to hire a research associate, which means someone with just a bachelor's, and the person who is now my boss, and also my wife's mother's roommate's husband, he said, well, you know what, instead of someone with a bachelor's, maybe we can hire a scientist instead, because we just met this guy, and so we should perhaps come for an interview. So that's how I got my job. It was part nepotism, and part sheer blind luck, and part, I guess you could say, that I positioned myself well by going to that conference. I mean, that one conference was one of dozens of conferences that I went to, and most of them were boring as hell, and you just sit there and wait for the person to stop speaking. Luckily, not all of them are that bad, and some of them are good, and maybe just by going out and trying things like this, you will see something and say, hey, that really sounds interesting. And then after that comes the luck. So he said, I asked him, well, would I be a postdoc? So I got my degree, my PhD in February, in February 2008. And I kind of stayed in my PhD lab for another 3 months to finish up. I guess technically it was a postdoc, but maybe I wasn't. I don't even know. It was just a weird little limbo 3 months. And then they said, well, you wouldn't really be a postdoc because we're so small that we don't have postdocs, and you'd be the only one. So we're not going to create a whole category just for you. So we'll make you a scientist, which is the step after postdoc in most places, but these terms are so arbitrary anyway. And I had a starting salary that was lower than what she showed for Genentech, so I was kind of in some ways still a postdoc. In some ways I still am. some ways I was a scientist. So it's all kind of, at small companies, it's fairly malleable compared to some place that has a whole established system. You saw the link here, actually put there, scientist 1, scientist 2, senior scientist. We only have something like 13 or 14 people with PhDs, and that's a third of the company. So everyone kind of has their own title. Mine right now is scientist. I've been there 5 years. Are there junior scientists? I don't think so. But if someone else came and they had no experience, would they be at a designation below me? I don't even really know. They'd have to create that designation. I don't care. So it's all kind of, you know, that's the least important thing at a small biotech company. The most important thing is working on something that keeps your company alive and that you can put out into the world. So what we're working on is this malaria vaccine. Not to go into the science of it too much, but basically in the 70s, there were a lot of experiments done with irradiated mosquitoes showing that if you get 1,000 irradiated mosquitoes to bite somebody, that person was immune to malaria for at least 10 months, 93% of the time. So a lot of people looked at that and said that's an interesting gold standard to kind of hold up for vaccines, but that's not a vaccine because you can't have a vaccine that's administered by 1,000 irradiated mosquitoes. And the innovation that Steve Hoffman had was to say, well, maybe we can turn it into a vaccine. Because people are searching for malaria vaccines all over the place. There are so many potential malaria vaccines in development, including one by GlaxoSmithKline, and they're all based on some subunit of the parasite that causes malaria. So his innovation was, why not just use the whole parasite? Instead of irradiating mosquitoes and having mosquitoes bite people, why not just take the parasites out of the mosquito, put them in a bottle, and then inject those into people? And really the only challenges at that point were engineering challenges, really hard ones, like making mosquitoes that were infectious enough that you could have enough parasites in a single mosquito to actually make this whole endeavor worthwhile. And making mosquitoes that are aseptic. Mosquitoes have bacteria and viruses and all kinds of nasty things in them. So we have the only colony of aseptic mosquitoes on the planet in Rockville. And in fact, there's some of the most highly infectious mosquitoes on the planet. So those challenges were actually addressed before I ever got there, which is great, because it must have been really hard. But then I got there in 2008, and we were in a position to start putting together our IND for the FDA, which is an investigational new drug application, which basically says, FDA, please let us inject this into people and see what happens. And it takes a lot of effort. That was I think, a 2,200-page document that we submitted to the FDA in February of 2009. And then we had a bunch of trials, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but the end, well, not the end at all, but the milestone that we celebrated in August was when we published a paper in Science showing that when administered at the highest dose, our vaccine protected 100% of the people that we gave it to. So we were really, really happy. This was an incredible day. We still, just the other day, were watching a video of all of us standing around in our CFO's office watching live streams of CNN on his computer when they're talking about our vaccine. It was really gratifying. One of the downsides to working in industry at all, or especially at a small biotech, is that it's not like academia where you're just churning out paper after paper after paper. My goal at work is not to make papers. My goal is to get results for us, many of which are proprietary. And so when we had this big announcement, for example, we published it in Science. I was an author on the paper, but I was 16th author out of 42 authors. And I felt really lucky to be one of those 42 authors, because honestly, if you look in the acknowledgement section, there are another 200 people listed. I mean, it's everybody. My company is 50 people working on one project. And we do publish some things, but it's not like academia. So if you worry about the number of papers per year and the impact factor of the journals and all that, then I've been doing a pretty poor job, because in the past 5.5 years since I graduated, almost 6 years now, I have published 2 papers. I've got my name on 2 papers, and I'm 16th author on one and 17th author on the other. They're both in Science, but 16th and 17th author, so really, I might have just doomed myself to not having a career in academia after this if I want. One of the reasons why I liked industry more than academia, not to badmouth academia too much, was that I like working on something that's going to help people. That was kind of the whole reason I went into Science. And I thought, when I was in Mud Hall, that I was going to work on something like that, because I was joining a lab making malaria drugs. But our drugs against malaria were really more for academic interest. There were compounds of a certain chemical class that we happened to have a grant to work on. And we were more interested in what we could generalize about thermodynamics based on the binding of these drugs. And that was, we tried some drugs in mice. That was one of my last things I did. I did some mouse work and showed that our best drug did basically nothing in mice. And so the response to that was, okay, well, keep going with that. Keep trying that. See what happens when you inject the drug twice a day. Higher concentrations, lower concentrations, 3 times a day, combination with other drugs. And it's just like, if I were in industry, we would have said, this drug sucks. Let's find a better drug. But in academia, we're more interested in the publications. So that's one reason why I left academia. Now I'm working on something where obviously it has no guarantee of working. But if it doesn't work, at least we've tried. And I'd rather spend my time trying than spend my time getting publications. That's just my own opinion. There's a lot of value to basic research. I don't want to belittle it, but it's not something that really interested me. So as sort of a, my position is called scientist of vaccine stabilization and logistics, which means that I'm primarily working on thermostabilizing our vaccine. So our vaccine is right now stored in vapor phase liquid nitrogen at below minus 150 degrees Celsius, which we believe is a perfectly feasible way to distribute a vaccine. It is done with veterinary vaccines all over the world, but it takes some education. So my job is to help think of ways to make the vaccine more potent and more thermostable and more stable during the production process. But that's really just my nominal job. That's kind of one part of it. When you only have 50 people at a company, everybody does a little bit of everything. So just randomly, I'm also on the sales team. We sell what we make to researchers sometimes, those who are doing very specific work. So I'm on the sales team for them. I manage our inventory. I'm in charge of our clinical data analysis. So when we get data back from clinical trials, which is very exciting to me, I get to analyze that data and say, this is what we observed from this clinical trial. Really, some of it is what your strengths are, and some of it is who's in the room when the CEO says, I need someone to do this. You're standing there, you do it. That's how I got to be in charge of watering all the plants in one of the offices. I mean, it's anything and everything, but that's what I like about it. I get to, if I were to leave the company tomorrow, I would at least leave knowing that I'm familiar with many different aspects of a company, of a biologics company, from manufacturing to quality assurance. I mean, when you're at this level, we're the ones who physically manufacture the vaccine. I sit there and dissect mosquitoes for hours sometimes. We're the ones who test it. We're the ones who actually bring it to the clinic. And I just sent some to Germany the other day, and I haven't got to go anywhere cool. Boss goes all these places. And we're going to the University of Maryland, just here in Baltimore, on Monday to do more clinical studies. We don't get to inject it into patients because we're not doctors, but we get to ready it in the syringe up to the point of injection. So since that publication in August, what we're focused on now is showing that it works again, and showing that it works in Africa, and several other things. We actually have a number of clinical trials going on right now that I'm not at liberty to speak about, but that we are very excited about and look forward to seeing the results of. I don't want to take up too much time, having come in late, and I think the questions sessions are always the most interesting parts anyway, so I'll just